Berzonsky, your host for Mideast Realities. The Middle East peace process has become a ubiquitous term. It is also a widely manipulated and grossly misunderstood term. More often than not, it is in fact a term used to mask and distort the realities of the actual situation in this vital region of the world. In December of '95, Professor Noam Chomsky spoke at a forum organized by the Society of Arab Students at Harvard University. Chomsky is one of the world's most praised political analysts and linguists, at times compared to Plato and Aristotle for his erudition. Even the New York Times has acknowledged that he is arguably the most important intellectual alive. Chomsky's comprehensive and historical review of the recent years of the peace process is of utmost importance to understanding what has really been taking place in the contemporary Middle East. His profound analysis helps explain why so many independent experts view the situation so differently than what is constantly reported in the American media. Furthermore, Chomsky's refreshing candidness helps to undo the distortions and deceptions brought about by powerful interest groups, especially the Israeli Jewish lobby. With so many politicians and so much of the media succumbing to the pressures and largesse of this lobby, Chomsky's insights become all the more consequential. Because of the importance of Chomsky's analysis, and because it's not available elsewhere, we present in this four-part Mideast Realities series the entire Chomsky lecture.
And it's still happening. 2 days ago, Israeli tanks wounded, apparently seriously wounded, 3 Norwegian UN soldiers in the security zone with anti-personnel weapons. That did get a couple of lines, but we don't know anything more about it. These are peacekeeping forces. These are UN peacekeeping forces, but they're from Norway. They're not U.S. soldiers. U.S. soldiers don't go to take part in peacekeeping operations, which is a wise thing, because the get shot at and wounded, or others who face threats. That's only other countries. In our case, the White House announced we're going to have robust rules of engagement. National Security Council, not like these wishy-washy Europeans. It's going to be like the National Security Advisor announced that if anyone fools around with our forces, we're going to hit them and hit them hard. And then more some, the President added, with deadly force. Now, there's an implication there from what wasn't said. The implication is you guys can commit as many atrocities as you like, but don't fool around with our forces, because if you do, you'll really get smashed. That's our military doctrine, and that's why the United States never takes part in peacekeeping operations where civilians are involved. Sometimes it's willing to move in when it looks sort of easy, like in Somalia. It looked as though the famine was sort of more or less over and the fighting had died down, so it looked like you could kind of move in and get some good photo ops. But it turned out that, some teenagers struck their fists and that sort of thing. And the thing ended up with, according to Washington sources, somewhere between 7,500 and 10,000 Somalis murdered. A couple of dozen American soldiers, and that's why the U.S. does not take part in peacekeeping forces. And until we can civilize our own society to some extent, that's a wise decision. Anyway, the Norwegian troops were. The fact that they were attacked by Israeli tanks did get a couple of lines, so we have to be honest about that. So the terror, and that goes on. I mean, there's no comment about Israeli terrorism in Lebanon. It goes on as they feel like. And that's sort of right in a way. They inherit the right of terrorism from the master, who has universal right of terrorism. And if you're a client, you just kind of get it by inheritance. So there's no point in saying anything about that. Well, what about these Palestinian forces that are being brought in to run the remaining areas under the standard colonial pattern? They're extremely brutal, very brutal. There's been extensive discussion about this in the Israeli press. And Palestinian human rights activists and lawyers and others have tried to say something about it and take quite a beating. That shouldn't really come as any particular surprise. First of all, there's a historical precedent. I mean, that is the historical precedent. So it's not surprising that it's being applied here, too, under this new colonial regime. And also, it was announced in advance. Right immediately after the Oslo I agreement, Prime Minister Rabin explained to the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, that the Palestinian forces who were being brought in, mostly from the outside, incidentally, on the classic pattern, the Palestinian forces who were being brought in to deal with the Arabs, he said, will be able to do it, I'm now quoting him, without problems caused by appeals to the High Court of Justice, without problems caused by the Israeli human rights group B'Tselem, without problems from all sorts of bleeding hearts and mothers and fathers. They'll be able to just handle it right. Henry Kissinger recently described Yitzhak Rabin as a visionary. He said, when you sit where I do and where I have, the number of world-class thinkers among statesmen is very limited, and he was one of them. The visionary Kissinger may not understand very much, but he recognizes a fellow visionary when he sees one, and he was doubtless impressed by that kind of comment, of which there are many, incidentally. The visionary Rabin had also outlined the permanent settlement, the outlines of the permanent settlement. Remember, this is just a stage. In the permanent settlement, he told the Israeli parliament, Israel will maintain control of united Jerusalem, which will extend, he said. It will go as far as Ma'ale Adumim to the east and Givat Ze'ev in the north. Those are outside suburbs. Ma'ale Adumim is quite far to the east. Its borders reach about 8 miles from Jericho, and it goes almost to the Jordan Valley, which Israel will also keep. And in addition, it will keep, he said, blocks of settlements, designated blocks of settlements in Judea and Samaria, as in Gaza, referring to what's called the Gush Katif block. The fact that these are blocks of settlements are important. That was one of the big things that were fought about in the Cairo agreements. The Palestinian Authority was initially willing to grant the Israeli settlements all sorts of rights, but Israel insisted on blocks. That means big regions surrounding the settlements, and those will be whatever they'll be. But those blocks, according to Rabin, will remain along with Jordan Valley, Jerusalem extending virtually to the Jordan Valley. Notice that bisects any potential Palestinian area. There are other breaks, if you look, that cut it up further into what are called cantons in the Israeli press, very much as in Gaza. Well, that's the final settlement that's looked forward to, which is essentially the what is active. I doubt that Israel will keep all the territory it now has. That would be completely crazy, in fact. Probably they'll go back to something like the most extreme demands that have been put forth in the past. The current agreement is, in fact, way out at the extreme. In fact, what it looks like now is the Sharon Plan of 1981. Ariel Sharon, the extreme right wing of Israeli politics, put forth a plan in 1981. It was a little different than the Labor Party plans. Not all that different, but somewhat different. And this one kind of looks like that, as has been pointed out in the Israeli press, I should say. And Ariel Sharon himself is reported by the American press to be pretty pleased with the whole business. Also, not surprisingly, because it's the most extreme proposal that's ever been made. Also pretty pleased is Yisrael Harel, who was the founder of the Yeshat Council. That's the Council of Settlers and Jewish settlers in Judea and Samaria, and the editor of its ultra-right journal, Nakuda. He said, yeah, we can live with this, it's fine. Yossi Beilin, who's the right-hand man of Shimon Peres and considered a really far-out dove, he informed the Israeli, he wrote to the press, that all settlements remain intact. He said that the negotiations were delayed for some months so that we could carry, because of the immense financial investment involved in ensuring that the blocks around the settlements would remain completely intact and building them. And then he added that the situation for the settlements was never better, the settlements in the West Bank, and that's pretty well accurate. In Israel, it's been pointed out in the press, in the mainstream press, that the arrangement that's now being made is rather like it's not like the end of apartheid in South Africa, it's like the institution of apartheid. It's like the moment when apartheid system was instituted with Bantustans and pass rules and all that kind of business, and that's pretty much what's happening now. That's an accurate description. Turning to the facts on the ground, which sort of work this out as implement it. There's been a considerable expansion of settlements in the occupied territory since the Oslo I agreement was signed, and that's continuing. There's been an increase of 40% in building starts since 1993, though incidentally it hasn't yet reached the peak periods of before. Also being built are a very elaborate network of bypass roads. In fact, the military budget was just announced a couple of days ago, and the military budget goes up largely because of the construction of this tremendous array of bypass roads, which are big highways designed to make sure that those 100 or so sectors of local Palestinian autonomy will be invisible and separated from one another, which means you already can, but when this is finished, it'll be even easier to drive around the West Bank from Israel to Jordan and through the West Bank and so on without ever seeing any Arabs, except maybe you could see some huts up on the hill, behind a dirt road that doesn't go anywhere or something like that. That's continuing at a very substantial rate. The new budget, just announced a couple of days ago, which was supported by the right wing, incidentally, was supported unconditionally by Likud, the right wing part of the government, has about over $30 million for new settlements, starting new settlement activity in the territories, and it spelled out. It incorporates Gush Katif, southern part of the Gaza Strip, into the Negev, into the Israeli Negev, in the Agriculture Department budget, and it gives special inducements to settlers in the southern part of Gaza for building things like fish tanks. This is an arid desert area, incidentally, where most of the water is used by a couple of thousand Jewish settlers. So if you go there and you build things like fish tanks, you get more. There are also continuing inducements to settlers to go to the West Bank. They have a considerably higher standard of life than the ones who remain in Israel because they get special subsidies to try to get them to go there, and those are going to continue, including new inducements to go to Ma'ale Adumim, this big region to the east of Jerusalem, to be ultimately unified into it, where there have recently been Bedouin lands expropriated for new Jewish settlement, and there's a new bypass road that was just opened on October 23rd. The new plans are to add 6,000 dwelling units there and 24 hotel rooms. They're aiming at a population of 50,000 there, which will ultimately be assimilated into Greater Jerusalem, and as I said, more or less bisects the West Bank. That's one of the many several cantons. Gaza is treated the same way. It's been sliced into kind of enclaves. There are roads that cut it all over the place. One of the roads is at the most strategic area. It separates Gaza City, which indeed is handed over to the Palestinians, because Israel just want to get out of there. It hands over Gaza City. It separates Gaza City from the big refugee camps, and the rest of the network of roads cuts the strip up in all sorts of other ways. It's also the Palestinian areas are separated from Egypt as well, and that means that the population can freely be imprisoned, either all or in part, selectively, at any time that anyone wants, that Israel wants, and the same is true now in the West Bank. The imprisonment is done by simply road control, which is closures, or even worse, by curfews. These are done for various reasons, sometimes for punishment, but more often for deterrence. So after there's a big Israeli atrocity, you have to punish the Palestinians, and that happens routinely. So, for example, after the massacre at the at the mosque in Hebron, the Palestinian population was put under long and heavy curfew to deter them from any reaction. And sometimes it's done that's common. Sometimes it's done for other reasons, like around the time of the signing of Oslo II, for several weeks the population was just imprisoned, to make sure that nothing went wrong. And sometimes it's done for other reasons. So, for example, to liberate Jewish citizens from the annoying presence of the locals. Example was a couple of months ago during the Passover holidays in 1995. I'll just quote from the Hebrew press on this. The Arab population of Hebron was locked up under 24-hour curfew for 4 days. Reason, quoting now, so that settlers, that's the 450 Jewish settlers who live there, so that settlers and 35,000 Jewish visitors brought there in chartered buses could have picnics and travel around the city freely, dancing in the streets with public prayers to bring down the government of the left, laying the cornerstone for a new residential building, and indulging in other pleasures. This is under the protective gaze of extra military forces that were brought in. They used the opportunity, I'm continuing to quote, used the opportunity to insult the Palestinians imprisoned in their houses and to throw stones at them if they dared to peek out of the windows at the Jews celebrating in their city. And then they brought the celebration to the close, still quoting, by settlers rampaging through the old city, destroying property and smashing car windows in a city magically cleansed of Palestinians. Children, parents, and old people are effectively jailed for days in their homes, which in most cases are seriously overcrowded, though they are able to turn on a TV set to watch a female settler saying happily, "There is a curfew, thank God," and to hear the merry dances of settlers in festive processions, some of them to the Patriarch's Cave, which is open only to Jews. Meanwhile, still quoting, commerce, careers, studies, the family, love, all are immediately disrupted. The medical system was paralyzed, and many sick persons in Hebron were unable to reach hospitals during the curfew, and women giving birth could not arrive in time at the clinics. Well, that's the description from the press. Very bitterly critical, incidentally, but not here. Here you just praise it as a great step in democracy and pay for it. That the opportunities for that now extend with the increase, with the new arrangements that are put in place under the historic compromise. In East Jerusalem, Israel can now continue to carry out the programs that the U.S. pays for and approves of. Might as well tell you what those are. These have been going on for some years. These are programs to reduce Arab citizens to second-class status in formerly Arab East Jerusalem, the part conquered in '67. These were devised and implemented by Teddy Kollek, former mayor, who's very much revered here as a great Democrat and, humanitarian and so on. They're now extended under Ehud Olmert, the new mayor from the right. The purpose was explained by Kollek's advisor on Arab affairs. He said the purpose is to place difficulties in the way of planning in the Arab sector. Kollek himself, as he put it, "I don't want to give the Arabs a feeling of equality, though he said it would be worthwhile doing so here and there where it doesn't cost us so much. Otherwise we will suffer." His planning commission, in fact, advised development for Arabs under certain conditions, namely if it would have a picture window effect, which will be seen by a large number of people, residents and tourists and so on. Kollek himself, while he was being praised here, informed the Israeli media that for the Arabs, he said, "I have nurtured nothing and built nothing apart from a sewage system," which he quickly added was not intended for their good, for their welfare, they being the Arabs of East Jerusalem. Rather, there were some cases of cholera in Arab sectors, and the Jews were afraid that they would catch it, so we installed sewage and a water system against cholera. Those are the good old days. Under Olmert, the new mayor, it's apparently getting considerably harsher, according to reports from there. These Kollek programs were analyzed by an Israeli city planner, Sarah Kaminker. She was a city council member and a city planner in Kollek's administration. This is in a recent report that was submitted to the High Court, sort of like Supreme Court, on behalf of Arab plaintiffs by the Catholic Legal Resource Center for Human Rights in Jerusalem. Her report says, in Jewish West Jerusalem's Jewish, that's been part of Israel. In Jewish West Jerusalem, she said, the report concluded, there is a detailed report, there's large-scale illegal construction, which the municipality does not prevent and retroactively approves. In Arab East Jerusalem, standards are different. There, 86% of the land has been made unavailable for use by Arabs. The remaining 14% is not vacant land, but land that has already been developed. Vacant lands are reserved for development by Jews or kept as what are called open landscape views, which are often for eventual development for Jews, so it regularly turns out. The dearth of land zoned for Arab housing is a result of government planning and development policy in East Jerusalem, where the Kalak administration conducted a consistent effort since 1974 to limit the land area available to Arabs for licensed construction. The goal is what's called demographic balance, partially achieved in 1993 when Kalak's municipality was able to announce that the number of Jews residing in East Jerusalem, that's formerly Arab East Jerusalem, had surpassed the number of Arabs. Well, report goes on to say that the government has provided housing in formerly Arab East Jerusalem, 60,000 units for Jews, 555 for Arabs. Arabs whose homes have been demolished for Jewish settlement often come from the lowest economic strata of the community and now live in makeshift hovels, doubled and tripled up with other families or in tents and caves. Now, some are willing to build their own homes and may have resources, but they're barred by law and subject to demolition if they proceed, and that threat is executed, unlike Jewish West Jerusalem, where the report goes on, the problem of illegal construction is as serious, if not more so, than in East Jerusalem, but the laws aren't applied. There are other ways to bring about demographic balance. For example, there are discriminatory regulations on building heights, which are very low for Arab settlements, but you can build high buildings for Jewish settlement, and all sorts of other zoning provisions and other legal instruments to intensify the discrimination between Jews and Arabs, and certainly that's true in Israel too, always using funds provided by the U.S. taxpayer, and either directly or sometimes through tax-free donations. It's the only country where you can give tax-free charitable donations to implement proposals of that kind. And it's always with the extensive approval of admiring U.S. commentators from across the spectrum, left to right. Well, that's now East Jerusalem. It can be extended there since the jihad is officially over and gotten the official stamp of legitimacy, and now on the West Bank too, under Oslo too. During the occupation, the 67, before the peace process was implemented, and it was under military occupation, the military authorities had issued a regulation which reads as follows: no permits will be given for expanding agriculture or industry which may compete with the State of Israel. That was the fundamental rule for the occupied territories. They were allowed what in U.S. traditional parlance is called complementary development. They're treated the way the U.S. treated, say, Latin America, which was allowed to have complementary development, but not development that might compete with U.S. interests. So when the U.S. took over Brazil in 1945, Brazil was allowed to have, say, a steel industry, but only if they produced low-grade steel, which the U.S. wasn't interested in producing, not if they got involved in the kind of steel production that we wanted. And that's standard. In fact, the British Empire ran that way, and the French Empire, and indeed everyone. So again, it's not surprising that Israel would have imposed those regulations to prevent any development in India is the same. In the occupied territories, for example, blocking a nail-making factory in Hebron because somebody thought it might interfere with a competing Jewish one. Although the health system was in fact extended, the reason was explained by Roni Shaked in a recent article in a leading journal, because they feared that disease might endanger the residents of Tel Aviv if they didn't have a health system there. But development, no. That was not permitted on a kind of a classic pattern of pretty maybe strong, but normal, perfectly normal. That's in fact a large part of the reason why the third world and the first world differ the way they do today. Part of the reason, a very substantial part. They didn't differ that way a couple hundred years ago. Well, that left the population in the territories a couple of options. One was exile, the preferred option, and the other was kind of what the Israeli press has regularly described as semi-slave labor under miserable conditions within Israel. That was the other option, or starvation. That second option, the semi-slave labor, that's recently been reduced. Israel's been bringing in real slave-type labor from traditional beneficiaries of Western civilization like Philippines and Thailand and so on, and also from Romania, another U.S. favorite. It was the favorite U.S. state in Eastern Europe under Nicolae Ceausescu, who was particularly beloved by the Reaganites and Thatcher and admired by them. And now they're coming in too, so that's even more easily exploitable labor because their families aren't even close, nothing's even close by, and they're completely isolated. This is vividly described and bitterly described in the Israeli press, but you don't want it to be known here because we have to praise the recipients of our massive donations, of course.